Why are the principles of Austrian economics so important to a free and prosperous society? Join Richard Ebeling and me in this week's Libertarian Angle as we examine that question. Hi, I'm Jacob Hornberger, president of the Future of Freedom Foundation, and this is this week's Libertarian Angle, the show that brings you all the principled case for the libertarian philosophy. I'm joined by my co-host, Richard Ebeling, professor of economics at the Citadel. Richard, good to see you again.
It's good to be with you and our viewers and listeners.
Yeah, how's your summer going now that you're relaxing? Well, even more than what you do during the school year.
No, still busy working, writing things, which takes a lot of time, and just keeping busy and doing these weekly shows with you.
Yeah, well, this is hard work.
It is. If our viewers only understood the trauma, the tragedy of having to be with you every week during this time slot. Oh, I'm almost a saint.
Oh, it's an arduous ordeal. In fact, you know, we're gonna be talking about Austrian economics today, which is a passion for you and me. But I think we've told this story a number of times before, but I think it bears repeating, just to show people what an arduous task you had back when we first met. And we're planning a series of lectures on Austrian economics in the fall. So I thought, well, it'd be nice to kind of give a little introduction here on Libertarian Angle on Austrian economics. What's it about? Why are you and I so passionate about it? Why we've been so passionate all of our lives as libertarians, and just discuss some of the central tenets of it. But I thought I would start out by giving the history of how you and I met, because it really does involve Austrian economics. Now, let me preface this by saying that we met in Dallas. You were teaching at the University of Dallas, and I was practicing law there. I was a trial attorney. That was what I did in my professional career before I did this. But let me preface this by saying that you went on and became the Ludwig von Mises Professor of Economics at Hillsdale College, and you were there for many years. And of course, Mises is the paragon of Austrian economic thought. And then you became the president of the Foundation for Economic Education, which of course has promoted Austrian economics ever since its inception in 1946, I think it was. But in any event, so we're there in Dallas, and I had moved to Dallas from my hometown of Laredo, Texas, and I was there. I had my own law office there in Dallas, but my heart was really with libertarianism. And so I found out that the head of the economics department at the University of Dallas, which was in Irving, a suburb of Dallas, was an Austrian economist. And so I made an appointment to see him, and I said, Tim, I'd like to hire you to tutor me in Austrian economics. And he said, well, let me see what you've read. And I'd been an economics major in college. Of course, I went on to get a law degree. But so I gave him the list of all the economics books I'd read. And he said, look, I really think we need to go back to fundamentals, start really with the principles. And I think we should do a chapter by chapter analysis to begin with Adam Smith's Wealth of Nations. I said, fine. So that's what we did. We analyzed Wealth of Nations chapter after chapter after chapter. And on the side, I was reading economic commentary books on the classical economists, including Smith. And then after we finished that, we went to David Ricardo's Principles. And we read then, after we finished there, John Stuart Mill's book, and we read a little bit more of the classical economists. We got to Carl Menger, really the first person in Austrian economics, and his book, Principles of Economics. So then he says to me, and I'm paying him for this, of course, and we're meeting once a week. So then he says to me, I've got a new guy coming into the department, and he's about your age, and he knows more about Austrian economics than anybody in your age group. And his name is Richard Ebeling. And he says, as much as I like taking your money, now that we're going to move into human action, which is von Mises's great magnum opus, he says, I in good conscience have to turn you over to Richard, because Richard will have a perfect grasp of human action. I said, fine. So Richard, you and I met and we struck a deal. And so we had our weekly lecture series, well, not lecture series, discussion series, just you and me, and discussing each chapter by chapter of human action. And then we go have lunch together. And so now you can finish the story here.
Well, I had just gotten to Dallas. I was going to have a number of different class preparations that I had not done before. So this was going to be time consuming. But this guy, Jacob Hornberger, approaches me. And at first I was hesitant to do this, more work and just settling in Dallas. But then he gives me an offer I can't refuse. So he tells me the fee that he'll pay for these weekly sessions with a tutorial going through the chapters of Ludwig von Mises's Human Action. And at first I was very diligent and conscientious. I'd be going through the chapter again and reminding myself and making some notes. So I'm being thorough and professional. I want him to feel he's getting his money's worth. And so we would start these sessions, and then like about halfway through it, Hornberger would then say, but wait a second, what do you think of drug laws? Well, how do you stand on rent control? So half of the time together ended up being a discussion on, where do you stand on free market and libertarian principles? Constantly poking. Are you compromising? And then after going through this, he would 9 times out of 10 invite me to lunch at a very nice Tex-Mex restaurant not far from the campus. And this went on for quite a while. And then one day he announces to me that he's leaving his law practice. He's changing what he's doing. He's going to New York and he's going to be the program director of the Foundation for Economic Education, FEE, which was then for a long, long time headquartered in Irvington on Hudson in New York, just a little bit north of New York City. And this was a terrible blow to me. This was an unbelievable blow to me. Here I see going out of the window, great pay, little work, and a free lunch. This is a tragedy, tragedy. But that's how Jacob and I first met and became and have remained fast friends. Then around 1989, I guess, you had decided to go off and found your own foundation, which became the Future of Freedom Foundation, FFF. And I get this call and said, well, would you like to serve as Vice President for Academic Affairs? And I thought for a minute, well, I've never had an affair in academia. Oh, no, he means something different. But I said yes. And we were working from the first issue came out of what was then called Freedom Daily, now is just called Future of Freedom, the monthly publication, in January of 1990. And we continued working on that until 2003, 13 years, when as you mentioned, I was offered the position to be the president of the Foundation for Economic Education, which I did for 5 years. And went back to academia after that. And then shortly after that, started writing articles again for FFF. And then doing these weekly webinars, I guess you call them. It's been a delight and a great pleasure. But we were brought together by a common interest in Austrian economics, encapsulated and reflected in Mises's Human Action.
Yeah, and I would say the large percentage of the articles that you've done for us have oriented toward Austrian economics. You did that lecture series for us on principles of Austrian economics,
which is up on YouTube. It's a 9-part video lecture series, which I after what we're going to discuss today, any viewer or listener who's interested in a bit more of an in-depth analysis, if I can toot my own horn here, I would suggest looking that up on YouTube. And also under the auspices of FFF a few years ago, I published a book called Austrian Economics and Public Policy, which gives an overview of the history and the main contributors to the Austrian school, and then chapters on a wide variety of policy-related issues.
Yeah, and then we've got your great book, Monetary Central Planning in the State, which is really written from an Austrian perspective. And so really, I mean, we spend a lot of time here at FFF on foreign policy, the national security state, the CIA, the military and so forth, and the drug war and immigration. But a large portion of the work we've done over the last 34 years has been in Austrian economics. So let's delve into that, Richard, because, when I discovered libertarianism, oh gosh, in the late 70s, I was practicing law in my hometown of Laredo, and I go into the library, public library, looking for something to read. I was a liberal Democrat, and I find these 4 little books that FEE, the Foundation for Economic Education, had published some 20 years before, and they changed the course of my life.
Essays on Liberty.
Essays on Liberty, volumes 1 to 4. I think it was a 10-volume set, but the library only had the first 4 volumes. But they consisted of all these hardcore, principled, no compromise authors, and that it was that power of no compromise that was able to crack through the inches thick indoctrination that encased my mind from 18 years of public schooling. And that's really what inspired me with FFF, is why we carry this principled message. Because to me, if all I'd read is some kind of hash of reform measures in those essays, they wouldn't have been powerful enough to break through this encasement of indoctrination. And a large number of those were Austrian economists. Ludwig von Mises was in there, and so that was a powerful thing for me. But let's just talk about, I'm sure most of our listeners know about Austrian economics, but for those that don't, it's a hard thing to sell, Richard, because it sounds weird. Well, I'm an Austrian economist. What do you mean you're an Austrian? Why? What are you talking about? We're Americans. And so when you first talk to somebody that knows nothing about libertarianism and you mention Austrian economics, it does sound a little weird. Like, what are you talking about? Why are you dealing with something called Austrian economics? So why don't you explain how that term came into existence and why it's a term that continues to be used widely in the libertarian movement? I mean, the thing that struck me most about Austrian economics was that this was a purist, principled exposition of the free market. I mean, and so you could say, well, this is free market economics. This is pure free market economics. This is the power that Austrian economics had for me. That the thing about the Austrians, Ludwig von Mises, Friedrich Hayek, Menger, was they clearly expressed to me how a market operates, the price system, the consumer, the role of the entrepreneur, and on and on. But it obviously is developed with this label Austrian economics. So give us a little bit of your analysis of that label and what you think some of the important principles are here.
Well, as you alluded to, the Austrian school began in Austria with the publication of a book by an Austrian-born economist named Karl Menger. He published this book in 1871, which in English is just mundanely called Principles of Economics. And that began this emergence of the school. Now, for the nerds out there who may have taken a history of economic thought class or any economics class when they were in college, and if you heard of his name, he's usually attributed to be one of the founders of what's called marginal utility theory, that the value of goods is not based upon, as the old classical and Marxist economists argued, the quantity of physical labor that had gone into its manufacture, but that value arises in the mind of the chooser, the decision maker, the evaluator, as to the usefulness of something and its worth. And therefore, economics is based upon, not in the ethical or philosophical sense of subjectivism, but in the personal valuation, the subjective valuation of the individual. And this spawned an entire school. And one other thing is that while most Austrian economists, Menger, Eugen von Bavarik, Mises, Hayek, are identified with a free market perspective, they always argued that they were not apologists for the market economy. They were merely economists who were attempting to understand and analyze in an insightful way what is the nature of the logic of human decision making? What is the process by which people find mutual gains from trade? How markets emerge and what their institutional requirements are, and the benefits that arise in terms of rising material and cultural and other benchmarks of a standard of living. Uh, how do these emerge and take their form? And if you believe that freedom is good, I've met very few people who say that they've ended their day and said, damn it, nobody sees me and make me their slave. I'm so depressed. Most people in their own very sundry ways, all would prefer to be free. That is to have autonomy over their own life and decision making. And if you believe in prosperity, that being materially and culturally prosperous is better than living in poverty. And I've met very few people who say, damn it, nobody robbed me of every cent and now I don't know where my next meal is coming from. I've met very few people who've said that to me. That if you believe in freedom and prosperity, then, and taking that as a given for virtually everyone on the planet, then what institutional arrangements, what human associative forms are most likely to generate that? And what Mises and Hayek and others attempted to do, especially in the 20th century, is to demonstrate and show that if our alternative economic systems from which a, quote, a society could choose, if you wanted to express it that way, that is a free market, private enterprise, quote, capitalist economy, a socialist centrally planned economy, or a welfare state government interventionist economy, if you study them thoroughly and in detail and do the appropriate comparing and contrasting, the only economic system that is truly consistent with a wide latitude of personal liberty and the institutional mechanisms by which individuals can associate and generate mutual betterment and wealth, that is a free market or capitalist society. What are the requirements of such a society? And in this sense, it's only fair the Austrian economists build upon those earlier classical economists to some extent, certainly Adam Smith. People may discover that they can be made better off through specialization, division of labor, each specializing what they are relatively better at and trading what they can do for what others can do better than they can for this mutual gains from trade. But that requires private property, property in one's person and in the physical means of production. And that not only secures your own autonomy of control over your life, but is the means by which people can trade. I have jacks, you have marbles. I would prefer to have some marbles compared to all of my jacks. You'd prefer to have some jacks compared to all of your marbles. And we may very well find mutual gains from trade. And as long as each of us feels that further trading is making each of us respectively better off, the gains from trade continue. When one or both of us decide that we would not be better off anymore, because we'd be now giving up something we value more highly for something we value less highly, the trade ends, which is also then part of the Austrian and general economic argument, to be fair, that all trade that is voluntary and based upon mutual agreement is what, to use that phrase, a positive sum gain. That is, both traders gain. Because if both traders would gain from a trade, why would government or anyone else force you to do something you didn't want to do, such as pay taxes for a service you don't want, or be forced down your throat to take some government service that you'd rather do without, based upon the compulsory tax payment that they've taken from you. But more than that, then what the Austrians did, they said, well, okay, we can explain the logic of how markets emerge, the role of division of labor, that in the division of labor, there are people who specialize in the vision of what is it that consumers in society want, how best to organize the resources out of which those desirable consumer goods might be manufactured, who take on the role in this division of labor of the entrepreneur, the businessman, decision maker and guider of production. He hires or purchases the factors of production, and he offers them to consumers in their finished forms. And that competition assures that each individual has the motive and the incentive to do the best they can because they can't force anyone to buy their product. They must offer a better product and or at better terms, a better price than the rival who is also free to try to sell similar or different wares to attract consumer business in competition with yours. But if all of that is true, how does that compare to a socialist system or an interventionist welfare state system? And Mises became most famous in his own lifetime for his critique of socialism. He said the socialists say they want to give people a higher freedom and an even greater standard of living than they have ever endured under the exploitation and oppression of capitalism. And Mises just asked a very simple question, Jacob. Suppose that the revolution occurs and the government seizes all the private means of production, land, resources, raw materials, machinery, factories, and now they're going to centrally plan everything to supposedly to do better than anything the market has claimed to do for the good of humanity. And Mises asked a very mundane question. How would you know what to produce? And how would you know whether you were producing it in the most cost-efficient way? Resources are scarce. They can be used in many different directions for different things. How do you know whether in value terms, this is the best or highest valued use for some resources compared to some other? And once you have done away with certain market institutions, Mises argued, that becomes impossible. The way I like to often express it is that if the government has nationalized the means of production, then there is nothing legally to buy and sell. If there's nothing legal to buy and sell, then there are no mutual gains from trade. If there are no mutual gains from trade, people have no incentive to make bids and offers to see if there could be a beneficial deal. I give you this and you give me that. If there are no potential mutual gains from trade through this type of mechanism, then there's no agreed upon terms of trade. If there are no agreed upon terms of trade, then there are no emerging prices. That is, this much of this to get that much of that. And if you don't have prices, how do people articulate and express to each other what it is they want? In a diverse and complex world economy now of over 8 billion people, where people are separated from each other by both time and space, right? Space is obvious. There are people in China 10,000 miles away from people in America. How do you communicate for what one could produce that the other wants and vice versa? But also time. If we go into the supermarket today and we buy our fruits and vegetables, they're only there because someone has in the past made decisions as to what crops to grow or what animals to raise in terms of meats and poultry and so on, so that those foods are available today when the production had to occur in the past. And if there's going to be food and meat on our tables on a tomorrow, they have to be producing today. So it's not just that we're separated by space, but we're separated from time. Someone has to act today based on what they think people would want in the future. That is not possible without people conveying this information to each other through the system of market prices. As Hayek highlighted, building upon Mises, is that there's a division of knowledge. Not just the butcher and the baker and the candlestick maker, but different types of nuanced and local specialized knowledge of how you see the situation and how you think resources are being used and what do you think certain consumers might want, and based upon experience and interaction with no one else has and can be never conveyed to a central planner or the most wise and best intentioned central planning board of the best and the brightest. It's either people being free to use their own knowledge and communicate with each other through prices. These are the goods I want. These are the uses I have for those resources versus the use that you have for those resources. And therefore, the price of the market enables us to compare what something is wanted as a consumer good relative to the resources to go into its manufacture. Would it result in a profit or would it result in a loss? Or if it seems profitable, are there better ways to combine the resources to minimize their value and other uses so as to maximize possible profit opportunities by using this combination as opposed to that combination? Now, at one level, all of this sounds mundane. It's not like the big, dramatic, emotional thing. But these are the kind of decisions that must be made by people participating in the marketplace each and every day if the goods and services that we take for granted and view as necessities or essentials or conveniences or amenities or luxuries are to be there, these decisions in these institutional networks have to go on each and every day. And what goes on each and every day without any of us thinking about it. What the hell do we know about the people in India or China or Portugal or Argentina or even next door to us 5 blocks away? But we're all interconnected in this complex global system of interactive division of labor by which each of us produces things for others. So we have the financial means from the income we've earned to buy what others are specializing in, people who will never meet, but are acting on our behalf, just as we act on other people's behalf through the networks of the market. It is an unbelievably miraculous and amazing system of human cooperation without anyone planning it, directing it, guiding it, commanding it, dictating it. It's a wondrous thing. And the Austrians showed that unless you have markets, you can't have this because the planet would be blinded. Blindsided would be like wearing a blindfold or trying to, in the old days on a sailing ship, on a dark night covered with clouds. You can't read the stars. How the hell do you know where you are and what direction you're moving in? Prices are the compass tool. So that demonstrates why socialism in all of its comprehensive forms, the Soviet Union and Cuba and North Korea and China, why that type of traditional socialist system was going to be an absolute failure, because it didn't have the institutions to allow the freedom to use their own knowledge and motives, and it did away with the signals of the marketplace, without which people can't know what others can do and others want to bring their own actions into coordination with the rest. Then finally, the third system is this interventionist welfare state. And Mises argued that this was also unworkable. It's true, the government regulation, the mixed economy, as it's called sometimes, doesn't abolish private property, but government regulates, it restricts, it prohibits, it constrains. It therefore narrows the arena in which the creative and innovative and forward-looking entrepreneur can make his best decision. What is it that consumers want? How best to undertake methods of production? What resources would be the most conducive to making the better product compared to my rival who's also after the consumer business, given that these resources have many other uses, making multitudes of other products having nothing to do with my particular corner of the market. All of these end up hampering, straitjacking the innovative creativity and flexibility and adaptability of the market and those who make decisions on the supply side of the market. And then Mises also emphasized that the worst of these are price controls. Prices, as his critique of socialism explained, have work to do. I've often thought that free competitive prices should be protected under the First Amendment of the US Constitution, Jacob. Freedom of speech. Why? Because it is through prices that we daily and continuously talk to each other, communicate to each other. This is the product that I want. This is the value I place upon it in terms of the price I might be willing to pay. I'm a businessman. This is what I think I could produce. These are the resources that might be usable in various combinations to make the desired consumer product. This is the value I see on them that I'd be willing to pay relative to the other businessmen. They say, wait, stop there. This is what I think their value would be. And I think they're worth more than you're willing to pay. So I want to bid for them to make my product with this combination of the inputs. This is a means of communicating. What price controls is this. And I want you to remember every word of that, Jacob. I mean, the thing is, it's like putting a gag over your mouth where people lose the ability to communicate in the market. And prices that are fixed by the government, too low in terms of what supply and demand are, too high in terms of what supply and demand actually is, brings about distortions and imbalances and misallocated uses of the scarce resources of society that could be used in more efficient and effective and coordinated ways to be making more and better of what we want. If you combine these types of criticisms against socialism, against the interventionist state, what you end up with is Mises's conclusion that if we want to have a system that gives us the most amount of personal freedom in an institutional system, an arrangement that enables us to cooperate and coordinate all that we do for mutual benefit, in this specialized system of now a global division of labor for an improvement of the conditions of all of humanity, there is no alternative to the free market system compared to its institutional alternatives. Now, of course, there's more than this. You mentioned my book that FFF was kind enough to publish, Monetary Central Planning in the State. There's the Austrian theory of money and the business cycle, and how business cycles, inflations, and depressions don't originate in the market, but are due to government control of money, mismanagement of the money supply, distortion of interest rates, which send off wrong signals to misguide and misdirect people to use resources for investments, that then is setting the system up for a re-coordinating adjustment, which we call the recession or the depression. But in a nutshell, these are some of the core ideas in terms of the policy issues facing any society that the Austrians have particularly focused upon, developed, elaborate upon, insightfully discussed, and I think show them to be profoundly important for anyone who believes in these two things called, oh yes, freedom and prosperity.
Yeah, that's an excellent synopsis of Austrian economics. Let me just highlight a few of them. That, the theory of subjective value that you mentioned really goes to show also that this is the way you can improve your standard of living, because as you point out, in every trade, you're benefiting, because otherwise you wouldn't be trading. You're giving up something you value less for something you value more. So through the mere act of trade, societies can increase their standard of living because they're improving their own well-being from their own subjective standpoint. Also, since I mentioned earlier that I grew up as a liberal Democrat, and before I discovered libertarianism, and so I was always concerned about the poor and how do you raise the standard of living for poor people? One of the mystifying things when I was growing up, I grew up in Laredo, Texas, which had on the other side Nuevo Laredo, Mexico, of the river, the Rio Grande. So it was really one great big metropolitan area that was separated by a river, much like the Mississippi divides cities and other rivers divide cities here domestically. But I couldn't understand that as soon as you cross the river into Nuevo Laredo, the poverty was so much greater. It was just marked. And how can this be? Can a river cause that much poverty where those on one side are poor, the others are relatively wealthier? And well, Austrian economics explains this, that if you want a higher standard of living, this is what you have to have. Free markets, people keep everything they earn, charity is voluntary. Now, and then the third thing I wanted to mention is what you mentioned is the miracle of the market. I mean, look around us. You can go into a grocery store, and in the first thing in the morning, there's all these fresh fruits and fresh vegetables. And how'd they get there? And we all take it for granted, Richard, but all those fruits and vegetables and canned foods and packaged foods, they're arriving there in the middle of the night because people are coordinating their efforts in a very complex market. And how does all this happen without government direction? But this is how our standard of living is improving. And the thing about it is that people take this for granted. Finally, let me mention this, is that we've got here in the United States a mixture. You've got a massive welfare state, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, just massive redistribution of wealth, and a regulated, highly managed, regulated society. You also have the market economy that functions in a large portion of the economy. The government doesn't take everything you earn. The government takes, let's say, 40%, 30% of your income. Well, the problem with this is that the standard of living of people is rising in America because of the market activity, but the welfare statists are sitting there saying, oh no, it's because of the welfare state. And then the regulated society, this is why we have higher standards of living. And this is the value of Austrian economics, because you can start understanding the logic of the market and the principles of the market and the principles of socialism, which is what the welfare state is, and the principles of interventionism. And you can start understanding logically that it's not the socialism and the interventionism that is raising people's standard of living. It's over here, the market activity, and that in fact, it's the welfare state and interventionism that is diminishing the increase in that standard of living. One of the things that I remember Leonard Read, the founder of the Foundation for Economic Education, repeatedly said in his essays that the fly on the chariot wheel thinks that he's moving the chariot, when in fact he has nothing to do with moving the chariot. But in his mind, he thinks because he's sitting on the chariot wheel that's moving around. That's the welfare status and the interventionists. They see rising standards of living in the United States and they say, oh, it's our welfare state that's doing this. No, actually, it's the opposite. They're diminishing wealth. And I mean, it's impossible. It boggles the mind to think how much higher the poor would be, the higher standard of living for the poor in this country, had we never had a welfare state and had we continued on the trajectory of a totally free market economy.
Now, if I could just sort of elaborate on this point, poverty. I assume that, like myself, many of the viewers and listeners watch the evening news, follow the news either in newspapers and online, and think of the imageries that we see very frequently. There's this civil war going on in Sudan, in Africa. And you see the abject poverty of these people, not just because of the destruction, but just, they live in shacks or in little huts, and they have low standards of living and primitive tools with which to undertake things, and we're shocked by this, or they have those monsoon floods in Bangladesh which just occurred, and every year this occurs, and thousands of people are killed. They were hundreds, and huge flooding. Why? Why is it that this huge swath of the world is still embedded with and suffering from such shocking poverty? Is it because of bad weather? Well, I suppose the climate change people would try to make that their shtick, but it's not, because long before this whole business about climate change, people were suffering from these things in these parts of the world, whether it be Africa or parts of Asia or parts of Latin America, South and Central America. The abject poverty is shocking when you see it on the news. Read about it, see pictures of it. If you travel to some parts of the world, why is it that some people are stuck in the poverty that good part of Europe and most of North America long escaped from? And it's because of the institutions and the attitude towards human relationships that, however imperfectly, as you were pointing out, we have this mixed business, but that emerged in the West, that evil West, respect for the individual and his rights, the dignity and tolerance for individuals to have the latitude and liberty to live their lives that they want, and only on the basis of free association, a respect for private property. However heavy the taxes, some notion that an individual does have a right to at least part of what he has honestly earned himself, and to have the incentive, even under this current heavy taxing system, to be able to use a good part of what he has saved or accumulated or has available from his own efforts to invest, to start a business, to grow a business, to generate employment opportunities for others that otherwise they wouldn't have. It's the institutions and the philosophy and the psychology of capitalism that has resulted in us rising from the poverty that has been the natural state of man for tens of thousands of years, and from which too many of our fellow human beings still suffer. One other example of this, in spite of America being, oh, that evil, racist, and oppressive and exploitive country, oh no, what an evil place America is. Why is it that these tens of thousands are trying to cross the Rio Grande, having come from parts of South America and Central America? Why, if this is such a bad country, they're trying to get here because they want to escape from the poverty and the oppression in their own lands, because however imperfectly, as we nuance and argue every week, America is in relative terms still freer, more secure, with freedoms on an everyday basis, still opportunities to start a business, be employed, and find a better life for oneself and one's children, compared to those parts of the world south of our border that do not have the institutions or the practice or the ideology that enables freedom and prosperity to be possible.
Yeah, and the shame of it is that there really is a key to poverty. I mean, that's the thing that the Austrians, if there's any great contribution, to me, the greatest contribution is the Austrians really discovered the key to ending poverty. I mean, that any nation in Latin America that wants to raise their standard of living, all they have to do is adopt Austrian economics, and that's the key. That would immediately start raising standards of living for the poorest people in society. But Richard, they can't do it. They're so addicted to this notion that we need government to take care of us, to watch over us, to give us our welfare, to give us our regulation, to tax us and control us. It's just this mindset that has existed throughout history. I mean, if you look at the entire span of history, the United States is just one tiny little blip there, especially the 19th century. Now, we know there were bad exceptions like slavery, horrible exceptions, but if you look at the rest of society, no income tax, no welfare state, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, immigration controls, drug laws, etc. In the great span of history, it's like a second compared to years. But they provided the light. They provided the way out of this morass of poverty. And all a nation has to do is adopt Austrian economics if they want to get out of it.
I'll just make a footnote to what you were saying. You're saying the exceptions. Well, it's important to realize that all of human history had slavery. All of human history placed women in a second-class status. You were the property of your father, you then were the property of your husband. In terms of the women's place in virtually all societies in the world, slavery was the endemic institutional form for all of recorded history, and obviously before that. So when we see America in the 19th century still having slavery, or women not having the same civil liberties and political rights completely as men, those are the residues, the leftover hangovers of the old system that America had seen a light of in terms of the idea, but was only slowly but surely escaping from in both practice and in the mindset of the people. It takes a long time to escape from the institutions and the cultures in which humanity had been embedded for all of its history on this planet. America was escaping from it. And yes, slavery was not ended the day the Declaration of Independence was signed. Yes, women did not have the same civil and political rights the day the US Constitution came into effect. But the premises of those two documents and the psychology of what was implied in them about how you should view other human beings, regardless of how they look, was by logical necessity going to require the abolition of slavery and the equality of political and civil liberties to everyone at the end of the day. And that's the history of America, escaping from those old institutions and moving to the practice of the ideals embedded in its founding documents.
Yeah, that's a good point. And then with the end of slavery after the Civil Wars, you move into the late 1800s and early 1900s. I mean, the trajectory was all well, not 100% positive, but mostly positive. Women were clamoring for greater rights. That was going to happen. But most of all, in terms of economic liberty, you had a free market economy. Inventions were coming into play every day. I mean, to me, this had to be an exciting place in which to live, where no IRS or income tax or Social Security or welfare or immigration controls. It was a vibrant, exciting society. And unfortunately, Richard, the welfare state way of life that ultimately predominated, for me, in my opinion, this constituted the new slavery, the new servitude, that you're really working for the state. The state decides how much of your income you're going to be permitted to keep. It's like an allowance. And this is what people lost out on, is that trajectory where the individual was sovereign and the free market was sovereign, it got submerged in this notion that now, no, the state is now sovereign. If it wants to conscript you and send you off into one of its foreign wars, you just got to do it because you serve the state. And if the state says you got to give 60% of your income or 40% of your income to the state, you got to do that because you exist to serve the state. That's one of the great tragedies of this reverse trajectory back into involuntary servitude. All right. Well, Richard, we went way over time today. So we're sorry that we went over time. I hope you all just enjoyed this discussion, though. And if you're new to FFF, come and subscribe to our FFF Daily. Come and visit us at fff.org. Subscribe to our monthly journal, to our YouTube channel, Facebook, and so forth, and Twitter. And Richard, I look forward to talking to you next week.
Until next time.